She was too small to be noticed, too weak to be loved, but one human changed everything. Lyra was not like the others in her species. She was small, very small, even for a child. Her skin was pale blue like the rest, but her arms were thinner, her legs shorter, and her voice softer. In a world where strength meant survival, Lyra had none. The alien colony of Brelktar lived high on the cliffs, cold winds always blowing through their rocky homes. The elders believed only the strong should be fed first, only the fast should be trained. Lyra, being slow and fragile, was always last. She would sit quietly during mealtimes, waiting for scraps, often going to bed hungry. Children mocked her, calling her featherbones and broken hatchling. Even the teachers ignored her in class. When she tried to help, they pushed her aside. Her people didn't hate her, but they treated her like she didn't matter, as if she wasn't even real. But Lyra had something they didn't see. She had heart. She watched, she listened, and she dreamed. She dreamed of someone who would see her, not as weak, but as worthy. One day, a visitor arrived in the colony, a human named Daniel. He came to trade medicine and tech, sent by Earth as part of a peace program. Humans were rare in these parts of the galaxy, and no one trusted them much. Daniel was tall, wearing a thick coat and metal boots. His voice was deep, and his eyes were calm. Wherever he walked, the aliens stared at him like he was a strange beast. He didn't care. He just smiled and nodded politely. That evening, while walking near the lower paths, Daniel saw something that made him stop. He saw a small figure curled up near a broken crate. It was Lyra, hiding from a group of bigger kids throwing stones at her. "Hey!" Daniel said softly, stepping in. The kids froze when they saw him. Humans were said to be strong and dangerous. The bullies ran away without a word. Lyra looked up slowly, her eyes wide with fear. She expected him to yell or walk away like the others, but instead he knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lyra didn't answer. She didn't know the words, but she understood the kindness in his tone. Daniel reached out his hand, slowly, carefully. Lyra hesitated, then placed her tiny hand in his. It was the first time anyone had ever helped her up. The first time someone looked at her with care instead of pity. Daniel didn't ask why she was alone. He just walked beside her, made sure she got back to the village square. Then, he gave her something, an Earth-made protein bar. She had never tasted anything like it. Sweet, soft, and warm. Word spread quickly through the colony. The human had touched the broken girl. He had spoken to her, fed her. Many whispered behind closed doors. Why would a human waste time on a worthless one like her? The elders called Daniel for a meeting. They warned him not to interfere, not to protect the weak. But Daniel just looked at them and said, "She's not weak. She's just not seen." That sentence made the room go silent. Lyra didn't know why he defended her. She didn't understand his world, or his reasons. But she knew one thing. When he was near, the world didn't feel so cold. From that day, Lyra began to follow Daniel from a distance. She watched him fix machines, teach the children, carry heavy boxes like they weighed nothing. Sometimes he'd notice her and wave. Sometimes he'd leave small food packets near her favorite hiding spot. For the first time, Lyra felt something new inside her. Hope, not the kind that disappears in the wind, but the kind that stays warm and strong. Maybe she wasn't born to be forgotten. Maybe she wasn't a mistake. Maybe, just maybe, she belonged somewhere, even if that place was beside a human who saw her differently from the rest. But not everyone liked the change. Some began to whisper louder, to glare at Daniel and Lyra with angry eyes. Trouble was coming, and Lyra, the outcast girl, was now at the center of something far bigger than she could imagine. The next morning, the air in the village felt heavy. Daniel walked through the narrow stone paths, carrying supplies on his back. But something was different. Eyes followed him, cold and silent. Even the children who once played in the open now stepped away when he passed. He wasn't surprised. The moment he helped Lyra, he knew he had broken something. An unspoken rule. This colony didn't just dislike weakness, they hated anyone who protected it. Lyra sat quietly on a flat rock near the well. Her legs dangled, barely touching the ground. When Daniel passed by, she looked up and gave a tiny smile. It was shy, unsure, but real. He stopped, gave her a little wave, and pulled something from his pocket. "Here," he said, handing her a soft scarf from Earth. It was light blue, the same color as her skin. She held it like a treasure. No one had ever given her a gift before, not even her parents. They had left her behind years ago, said she was too weak to be worth feeding. Daniel sat beside her, not saying much. He didn't want to scare her, but inside he was thinking, why was this girl treated like nothing? Why did no one care that she was starving, cold, and alone? Later that day, Daniel went to speak with the local trade chief. He needed permission to stay a few more weeks. The chief was a tall, hard-eyed alien with sharp horns and a bitter voice. "You were not sent here to interfere," the chief said. "You were sent to trade, not to adopt our failures." Daniel didn't flinch. He looked the chief in the eyes and replied, "She's not a failure, she's a child." The chief growled. "She is small, weak, and useless. She brings shame to our kind." Daniel leaned forward and said quietly, "Then maybe your kind needs to change." Those words echoed in the cold room. The guards stepped forward, ready to remove Daniel, but the chief raised a hand and stopped them. "You may stay," the chief said, voice sharp like ice. "But if you protect her again, you will be watched." Daniel nodded slowly, then walked out. He had made a choice. He would protect Lyra no matter what, even if it meant making enemies in this place. That evening, while walking past the tool shed, Daniel found Lyra again. She was sitting on a pile of soft wires, trying to fix a broken circuit. Her hands were small but steady, her eyes focused. She didn't notice him watching. "You're good at that," he said finally. She jumped, startled, then blushed as her tiny fingers dropped the wire. You think so?" she whispered. "I know so," Daniel smiled. "Want to help me tomorrow?" Her eyes widened like stars. Help him? No one had ever asked her that. She nodded quickly, afraid he might change his mind. The next day, Daniel showed her how to clean the tools, how to organize the parts. She couldn't carry much, but she was fast with her hands and quick to learn. And Daniel noticed something strange. When she worked beside him, the tools didn't glitch, the machines hummed smoother. It was as if her presence calmed the technology. But not everyone was happy. A group of older children began whispering. They didn't like seeing Lyra near the human. To them, she was still the weak one, and now she was getting attention, worse, respect. One of the boys, bigger and crueler than the rest, named Vexer, walked up to Daniel during his work. "You should not waste time with her," Vexer said, arms crossed. "She's not one of us." Daniel didn't look up. "She's one of the smartest helpers I've had," he replied calmly. "More helpful than you standing there." Vexer's face turned red with anger. He kicked a tool bucket and stormed away. Later that night, Lyra sat alone near the fire pit. Daniel joined her, handing her a warm drink. "Some people won't like this," he said. "Me working with you." She looked down, scared. "I don't want you to get in trouble." Daniel laughed softly. "You didn't get me in trouble. I made a choice. I chose to help you. Because you deserve it." Her eyes shimmered. For a moment, she forgot she was small, forgotten, and unwanted. For a moment, she felt like someone important, because someone strong had chosen her. But in the shadows, Vexer watched. fists clenched. He and the others would not let this go. They had been the center of the village, the strong ones. Now, a tiny girl and a human were changing everything, and they would make sure it stopped. Lyra woke up early, her tiny feet slipping into cold sandals. She looked out from the window of her small stone room and saw Daniel already walking near the workshop. The village was still quiet, the morning sky painted in soft purple and orange. She wrapped Daniel's gifted scarf around her shoulders and smiled. Today she would help him again. She couldn't remember the last time she felt excited about anything. The world used to be too big for her, too loud, too dangerous. But now it felt different. Now, it felt like someone had made space for her. As she stepped out, the wind blew hard, making her stumble a little. The stone paths were uneven. The doors of the buildings were taller than she could reach. She had to stretch her arms just to knock. Still, she didn't give up. When she arrived at the workshop, Daniel was sorting parts. He turned and smiled. "There you are. Ready to get your hands dirty?" She nodded quickly, wiping her nose with her sleeve. Daniel handed her a small toolkit, specially made by adjusting one of his earth repair kits, to fit her hands perfectly. All day Lyra helped him. She crawled into small spaces to check wiring, handed him tools, organized parts. He even lifted her up so she could see inside a broken energy core. She gasped, seeing the glowing blue light inside. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "Just like you when you smile." Lyra blushed deeply, her tiny fingers clenching the edge of his coat. No one had ever said something like that to her, not even close. But outside, the villagers watched with quiet anger. To them, Lyra was still nothing, and now this outsider was giving her attention, building her confidence. They saw it as weakness spreading like a disease. At noon, the food station opened, and Lyra stood in line with Daniel. Normally, she would eat last or not at all. But Daniel placed a tray in her hands, full and warm. The other aliens gasped. Some even whispered loudly, "That's her? The weak one. She shouldn't eat like that. She's stealing from the strong." Lyra looked down, shaking. Daniel gently touched her shoulder. "Eat. You earned it." She sat beside him, taking small bites, afraid someone would yank it away. But no one dared approach while Daniel sat beside her. After lunch, they went back to the workshop. Lyra climbed a step stool to help adjust a solar panel. Suddenly, the wind picked up, and she slipped. Before she could fall, Daniel caught her midair. He held her close, her face pressed against his chest. "I've got you," he said gently. Her heart pounded, not just from the fall, but from the feeling of being safe. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the cliffs, Daniel sat with Lyra outside the workshop. "You did good today," he said, sipping warm tea. "You're strong, you know that?" Lyra looked up at him, confused. "I'm not strong," she said quietly. "I fall. I can't carry heavy things. I get tired fast." Daniel chuckled. "That's not what strength means. Real strength is staying kind even when the world is cruel. Real strength is showing up every day when people want you to disappear." He looked at her gently. "That's what you do. That's why you're strong." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded, slowly, finally understanding. But danger was growing in the background. Vexer and his friends met in the shadows. They watched how Lyra now smiled, how Daniel protected her. They didn't like it. "She's changing things," Vexer growled. "Soon the elders will start listening to the human, and the girl will become something." The others nodded, angry, jealous, afraid. Vexer continued. "We have to remind them she's still small, still weak, still nothing. They plan to scare her, maybe hurt her, just enough to push her back into hiding. And this time they would make sure the human couldn't stop it." That night, Lyra sat alone near the fire pit, staring at the stars. Daniel had gone to check the supply pod on the far ridge. She hummed softly, feeling warm inside. The wind brushed her cheeks, but she didn't feel cold. Behind her, quiet footsteps moved through the dark. A stone shifted. A shadow approached. She turned, eyes wide, sensing something wrong. The stars blinked above Lyra like tiny fires in the sky. She sat alone near the fire pit, her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. The flames danced, warm and quiet, but something felt wrong. The wind had changed. It carried a cold breath she didn't recognize. She turned her head slowly, her big eyes scanning the shadows. Behind the stone shed, someone moved. A footstep, soft but close. Another sound. A low whisper, sharp like a snake's hiss. Lyra stood up quickly, clutching her scarf. She took one step back, then another. Suddenly, Vexer stepped out from the shadows. His arms crossed, eyes full of hate. "Well, look at the little star," he said with a fake smile. "Out here shining alone, without her protector." Lyra's heart pounded. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Behind Vexer, two more boys appeared. They were bigger, stronger, and meaner than any she had ever faced alone. "Daniel isn't here tonight," Vexer continued, walking slowly toward her. "And we've been thinking, maybe it's time you remembered your place." Lyra turned and ran, her tiny feet slipping on the rocks. She headed for the lower path, hoping to reach the workshop. But they were faster. They cut her off, pushing her into a corner between two buildings. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You made the elders talk about you," one boy spat. "You made the human ignore us," said the other. "You think you belong here?" Vexer growled, stepping closer. "You belong in the trash." They shoved her. Not hard, but enough to knock her down. Her back hit the wall and she cried out in pain. Tears welled in her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. She wouldn't let them see her cry. Suddenly, a deep voice echoed from behind them. "She does belong here." The boys froze. Vexer turned slowly and saw Daniel standing in the dark. His eyes burned like fire, his fists clenched. "Touch her again," Daniel said, stepping forward, "and I'll make sure you regret it." The boys hesitated. He wasn't holding a weapon, but he didn't need one. Daniel was taller, stronger, and full of rage. "You can't tell us what to do," Vexer shouted, trying to sound brave. "This is our village." Daniel walked right up to him. "You're right. This is your village," he said calmly. "But Lyra lives here too, and I won't let you treat her like garbage." Vexer tried to speak again, but Daniel didn't let him. "Go," he said sharply. "Now." The boys backed off slowly, then ran into the night. Daniel turned to Lyra and knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now. Lyra shook her head, though her hands were trembling. He picked her up gently and carried her to the workshop. There, he set her down on a soft blanket and gave her warm tea. She didn't speak for a long time. She just sat, holding the cup with both hands. Daniel sat beside her, watching her quietly. Finally, she whispered, "Why do you keep helping me?" Daniel looked at her for a moment, then answered, "Because someone has to, and because I see you." "You're not a mistake, Lyra," he said. "You're strong, you're smart, and you matter." Lyra stared at him, her eyes wide. No one had ever said that to her, not even close. In that moment, something inside her heart shifted. She wasn't just a small girl anymore. She was someone who had been chosen, someone who was protected. But things weren't over yet. The next morning, the elders called Daniel to the main hall. The attack had caused a stir in the village. The whispers had grown into full voices. Some accused Daniel of interfering in their traditions. Others said he was trying to change the way of their people. The chief elder, an ancient alien with silver horns, stared at Daniel with cold eyes. "You were warned," the elder said. "You were told not to interfere." Daniel didn't back down. "I didn't interfere. I protected someone who needed help." "She's part of your village, isn't she?" The elder's eyes narrowed. "She was left behind for a reason. She is weak." Daniel stepped forward. "Maybe she's not the weak one," he said. "Maybe the weak ones are those who attack a child because they feel threatened." Gasps echoed around the hall. The elder leaned back, silent for a long time. "You may stay," he said finally. "But if anything else happens, we will not protect you." Daniel nodded. He didn't need their protection. He only cared about one thing now, keeping Lyra safe. That night, as the stars returned and the fire pit glowed once more, Lyra sat beside Daniel, close and quiet. The world was still too big, the path still hard. But with Daniel by her side, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt like she belonged. And for the first time, she believed it was true. The sun had not yet risen, and a cold fog covered the village. The sharp wind cut through the rocky homes, making the morning feel colder than usual. But Daniel was already awake, checking his tools and inspecting the broken satellite dish near the ridge. Lyra stayed behind in the workshop, sweeping the floor and sorting wires with tiny hands. Everything felt peaceful, too peaceful. She hummed softly to herself, wrapped in the blue scarf Daniel had given her. But outside, something was happening. Something dark and hidden. Vexer was not finished. The warning from Daniel had only made him angrier. He could not stand how the human had made the others notice Lyra. He wanted her gone. For good this time. He gathered 2 of his strongest friends, and they whispered near the frozen river. "She has made a fool of us," Vexer hissed. "But if we make it look like an accident, no one will blame us." The others nodded, eyes cold. They had a plan, and this time the human wouldn't be there to stop them. Lyra left the workshop to fetch a part Daniel needed. She carried a small bag and walked toward the supply room on the far side of the village. The path was empty, the fog thick. She moved slowly, unaware that someone was following her. Suddenly, a shadow blocked her way. She turned and saw Vexer. Before she could run, strong arms grabbed her from behind. They tied a scarf around her mouth and lifted her off the ground. She kicked and struggled, but her size made her easy to carry. They took her toward the cliffs, far from the village center. There was an old pit there, used to collect rainwater from the cliffs. It was deep and dry now, and surrounded by sharp stones. "Throw her in," Vexer ordered. "She'll cry. Maybe someone will find her later, maybe not." The other boys hesitated, but only for a second. They swung her back, ready to drop her. But then came a voice, a roar louder than any wind. "Let her go." Daniel was there, running full speed toward them. His boots pounded the frozen ground, his face full of fury. The boys froze, but Vexer stepped forward to block him. "You don't belong here, human," Vexer spat. "She's one of us, not one of you." Daniel didn't answer. He punched Vexer straight in the jaw, sending him crashing into the ground. The other 2 boys ran, terrified. Daniel picked up Lyra gently, tearing the cloth from her mouth. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice trembling. Lyra nodded, tears in her eyes. I tried to fight, but..." "You did fight," he said. "And you're safe now." Vexer groaned from the ground, but Daniel stepped over him. "If you ever touch her again," Daniel said, "I won't hold back next time." He carried Lyra all the way back to the village. People peeked out from behind doors, watching in silence. Daniel didn't care. He walked straight to the elder hall and kicked the door open. "She was attacked," he said loudly. dragged to the cliffs and nearly thrown into a pit. The elders gasped. The chief elder stood slowly. Who did this? Daniel looked around. Vexer was being dragged in by 2 guards. His face bruised, his clothes dirty. One of the guards said, "We found him crawling near the ridge." The elders questioned him. Vexer tried to lie, but Lyra stood up and spoke clearly. "I saw him," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "He tried to kill me." Silence filled the room. Then the chief elder spoke. "Vexer has broken the law of life. We protect the young, not destroy them." Vexer was banished that same day, sent away from the village with nothing but shame on his back. Daniel took Lyra back to the workshop. He placed her on a soft cushion and made her tea. Her hands were still shaking, but she smiled at him. "You came for me?" she whispered. "Of course I did," he replied. "I always will." For the first time in her life, Lyra didn't feel afraid of the world. The cliffs still rose high, the wind still howled, the village still looked at her with mixed eyes, but she knew something had changed. The worst had come, and she had survived. Daniel stayed close by her that night. She fell asleep with his coat wrapped around her. His presence beside her felt like a wall, strong and warm. Outside, the wind blew, but it could not reach her anymore, because now, she was no longer alone. Now, she had someone who would fight for her, protect her, and see her for who she really was. The next morning, something strange happened in the village. For the first time in many seasons, the elders called a full gathering. The central square filled with whispers, curious eyes, and unsure voices. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next after the attack on the little girl. Lyra stood quietly near the edge of the square. Her scarf was pulled close to her face, and her hands trembled slightly. Daniel stood behind her, calm but alert. He had promised her she wouldn't face this alone, and he kept his word. The chief elder raised his hand, calling for silence. His silver horns caught the sunlight, and his long robe moved softly in the wind. "Yesterday," he began, "a crime was stopped, a life was saved, and a shame was uncovered." He looked directly at Lyra, then turned his gaze across the crowd. "For too long we ignored one of our own," he continued. "We called her weak, unworthy, invisible, but now, because of a stranger, our eyes are open." The crowd was silent. Some nodded slowly, others looked away in guilt. The elder took a deep breath. "She is small, yes, but her heart is large, her spirit unbroken, and her presence has reminded us of what it means to be alive." He paused, then pointed his hand toward her. "Come forward, Lyra." Lyra's legs felt frozen. Her heart pounded in her chest. She looked back at Daniel. He smiled and gave a small nod. "You can do this," he whispered. She stepped forward slowly, each footstep echoing in her ears. The crowd parted, watching her like it was the first time they had truly seen her. She stopped in front of the elders, her head bowed. "Lyra," the chief elder said gently, "do you wish to stay in this village?" Lyra looked up, her voice quiet but clear. "I never wanted to leave. I only wanted to be seen, to be part of something." The elder smiled. "Then you are, from this day forward, fully part of us, and no one will call you weak again." Gasps spread through the square. Some of the villagers clapped softly. Others simply watched in silence. For Lyra, the world felt like it was spinning slowly. Was this real? Was she truly accepted now? She turned and looked at Daniel. He stood tall, proud, and smiling. In her heart, she knew this day wasn't just about the village changing. It was about her changing. Later that day, children who had once mocked her came to speak. They asked if she could show them how to fix a solar panel. One offered her a small sweet cube as thanks. Lyra smiled and said yes, It felt strange, but good to be noticed without fear. She walked through the village with Daniel. Not behind him, but beside him. They visited the market together, picked tools, and even stopped by the river. Lyra sat on a flat stone and let the sun warm her face. Feels different now, doesn't it? Daniel asked, tossing a pebble into the water. She nodded. I don't feel small anymore, not inside. Daniel smiled. That's the only size that ever mattered. But not everyone celebrated. Some still whispered, afraid of how quickly things had changed. A few muttered that it was the human's influence, not true respect. Daniel heard the whispers, but he didn't react. He knew change never came without resistance. What mattered was that Lyra felt hope and strength. That evening, the village lit lanterns to celebrate the festival of warmth. It was the first time Lyra had ever been invited to join. She wore a soft cloak made by one of the elder weavers, and her scarf was tied neatly around her hair. The fire pit was surrounded by music, food, and stories. Daniel stood beside her as she was handed a small glowing crystal, a symbol of belonging, of being seen. She held it tight, feeling its warmth in her fingers. Then, with trembling steps, she stepped forward and placed it in the center flame. The fire turned blue for a moment, then golden, a sign, the elders said, of a pure and powerful heart. Cheers rose around her, and for the first time in her life, Lyra smiled without fear. She laughed, not softly, but fully, like someone who knew she was no longer alone. Later that night, she sat beside Daniel on the edge of the ridge, watching the stars. Do you think I'll ever be like them? She asked quietly. Daniel shook his head. No, you'll be better. She looked confused. Why better? He looked at her, his voice soft. Because you had to fight twice as hard to be seen, and you still stayed kind. That kind of heart changes worlds. She leaned her head against his arm, and for the first time in her life, the universe didn't feel too big. Felt just right, because now, she wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to live. The village was quiet the next morning. The festival lights were gone, but the warmth still lingered in the air. Lyra walked through the paths with a peaceful heart. Children waved to her. Elders nodded politely. Even the market keeper gave her an extra sweet cube with a smile. For the first time, her steps felt light. Her shoulders didn't feel heavy. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't afraid. She belonged. But deep inside, a storm was coming. Daniel stood near the edge of the village, holding a message crystal in his hand. It blinked red. Urgent recall from Earth. He read the words again, hoping they would change, but they didn't. Mission complete, it said. Return immediately. Transport arrives in 2 days. He looked out at the mountains, his jaw tight. Lyra had just begun to feel safe, and now he was being pulled away. That night, he sat with her near the fire pit. She was telling a story to 2 smaller children, using tiny tools as characters. Her eyes sparkled. Her voice was soft, but confident. When the story ended, the children clapped and ran off laughing. Daniel stayed quiet until she turned to him. Why do you look sad? She asked. He hesitated, then handed her the crystal. Her smile faded as she read the glowing words. You have to leave? She whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. They want me back. My job is done here. Lyra looked down. Her small hands clenched the crystal. She didn't cry, but her chest felt heavy. She had known this day would come, but she didn't think it would feel like this. She didn't want to go back to being alone. Not again. You'll forget me, she said softly. Daniel leaned closer. I could never forget you. You're the bravest person I've ever met. But what will happen to me when you're gone? She asked. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were shining with held-back tears. Daniel took her hand gently. "You don't need me to protect you anymore, Lyra," he said. "You've already proven how strong you are." The next morning, the whole village knew. The human was leaving. Some looked sad, some looked relieved, but most were quiet, unsure of what to say. Lyra didn't come out all day. She stayed in the workshop, sitting where Daniel used to rest after long walks. His scent was still in the coat he left behind, and she wrapped it around her tightly. Was this really it? Was it going to end like this? The transport ship arrived at sunset. Its engines hummed above the cliffs, dust swirling below as it hovered slowly. Daniel walked toward it, carrying his gear. He looked back one last time at the village, the place that had changed him. He didn't see Lyra anywhere. He felt a tightness in his chest, but he turned away. Just as he reached the ramp, a shout echoed behind him. "Wait!" He turned and saw her. Lyra was running, her legs tiny but full of power. Her cloak flew behind her, her eyes wide with fire. She ran straight to him, holding something in her hands. She stopped, breathing hard, then held up a small crystal. "I made this," she said, voice shaking. "It holds my voice, so you'll never forget it." Daniel smiled, his heart heavy and full at the same time. He took the crystal gently, then knelt down. "I don't want to forget you," he said. "But more than that, I don't want to leave you." Lyra looked up in surprise. "But you have to go." Daniel looked back at the ship, then at her. "No, I don't," he said. "Not if I choose to stay. I've sent a reply. I declined the recall." Her mouth dropped open. You're staying?" He nodded. "Earth will be fine without me, but I don't want to miss what comes next here." "Not without you." Lyra suddenly threw her arms around him. She didn't care who was watching. For the first time, she let herself cry. Not out of fear, but because she had never been this happy. The ship waited a few more moments, then lifted slowly into the sky and vanished. Daniel and Lyra stood there together, watching it disappear. Later that night, they sat near the fire again. This time, others joined them. The elders came and handed Daniel a new set of village robes. He was no longer a guest. He was one of them, and beside him sat the smallest girl in the village. Once forgotten, once mocked, now the strongest heart of them all. Lyra leaned on Daniel's side. "I still feel small," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "Good, because now I can hold you better." And he did. Not because she was weak, but because she was his. She wasn't just accepted now. She was loved, protected, and most of all, she belonged, not just in the village, not just in Daniel's heart, but in a story that would never be forgotten.